Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So, a lot has been going on around the planet, as we all know. I thought that this would be a good time to talk about power. Perceived power, real power, the differences between social power and magical power. It's sort of a loaded term. So, first off, I like to talk about our current society. Well, not current as in right now, but what society has been for a long period of time. So it's not just like because of what's happening. We are structured as a society, and not just us, but other countries around the world as well are similarly structured with the idea that there are some people that are more important than other people and have more perceived power because of it, and then other people who don't. Starhawk calls this power over and power under, which is a really good terminology to use to understand what this means. So power over and power under goes all the way down to the bottom and all the way up to the top. The way we look at the world and the way we relate to in society is that there's always someone who is got more power than we do and who has more ability to decide what's going to happen to us than we do. And it starts off in the nuclear family or in any kind of a family where you've got, like with my family when I was a kid, my father was definitely the person who had the most power in the house. And he gained that power through fear and intimidation and torture. So his idea of respect was combined with the of the way of dealing with us, making us afraid. If we were afraid of him, then we respected him, which I don't think is true. I have a different definition of respect than that. But then he was in the Navy, and so he would go out to do his job, and he would have underlings, people who were under him, because he was a chief petty officer. But then he'd have all the officers and then everybody else that's above him. And the military is a good example of how that power over, power under structure is made, because there's always someone else who's a little bit higher up than you who has more control over what you're doing. So this is an illusion, in my opinion, because power isn't like there's only so much of it to go around in reality, so that there's a limited amount of it, so that some people have more of it than others, and so forth. But this is our way of thinking. This is what we've been raised in. This is how we experience the world. And it's interesting to see what happens when a structure, bureaucracy, or whatever that runs on this model encounters something it doesn't expect. And the results of these encounters can be anywhere from mild to extremely violent, because the people who think that they have power, when faced with the possibility that they either don't or someone else is trying to take it away from them, generally react in fear, which usually turns into anger and aggression and a negative response. And I think it's important to know how it works, because when you're out there in the world, not everyone's going to think like we do on a lot of things. And certainly, if you're trying to get something done and you encounter this kind of a power structure, knowing how it works gives you a leg up, because it makes it more probable that you're going to figure out how to work your way around it. Because just, an individual doesn't change the power structure. So, my family, we were protesters right from the start. We protested the war in Vietnam. My mother and my sisters and my brother, we were out on the Washington Monument lawn during some of the bigger protests during the 60s and so forth. And that was, for us, it was a way of trying to reclaim the power of our voices, because that's what protest is about. Being able to say what's going on and to have other people see what's happening and give it some credit. But those were early experiences. They were all very peaceful protests. There weren't any confrontations, not where I was, with authority figures and that kind of thing. So I did not know how bad it could be except from watching on, television, from my own personal experience with it. So when I moved to Santa Cruz in the mid 80s, one of the things I found about that community was you had to have some kind of a something you were trying to change in the world. Everybody had their projects, whether it was saving the whales or uh, helping the farmers or the pickers of grapes and stuff like that get a fair wage or whatever it is. If you didn't actually have something that you were passionate about and you wanted to do something about, then everyone wanted to get you involved in their project. And I was like overwhelmed by the number of things that were coming out of me because, or out at me, because, that community was very proactive, at least at the time. And I think there's probably still a lot of that happening in Santa Cruz, but it doesn't seem to be as much as it used to be. So, my situation after I got there, my daughter was in school and she was learning about nuclear energy, nuclear power, nuclear war potential, and was feeling extremely depressed and hopeless. She said on more than one occasion she didn't see the point of growing up because the world wasn't going to be there by the time she grew up. So who gave a hoot? And because of that, I decided I needed to do something to help my daughter see that even in what seems like a hopeless, powerless situation, there are ways that you can take your power back and you can act. You can either surrender or you can act. There's just like no other options when it comes to that. And that's when I learned that the original Mother's Day was started as a political action to stop war. And some women had actually organized a Mother's Day protest at the Nevada test site. So I signed up to go to the Nevada test site and protest with my daughter. It was important for her to be there because I was doing this so she could see, not hear, but actually see and experience what it's like when a larger group of people get together with a common goal to try and effect change. And so, it was a nonviolent protest we were committed to. And I went through training. The Santa Cruz was great. They had a lot of nonviolent training seminars and stuff like that were free. The whole city was actually behind the idea of a group of its citizens going to the test site to try and stop they were testing nuclear warheads. They called them reliability tests. So they would randomly take a nuclear warhead from the top of a missile and they would transport it over to the Nevada test site. They would throw it in the ground in a deep pit and then they would see if it blew up. They wanted to make sure that the chances of most of their bombs blowing up if they ever needed to use them was good. So they were trying to test their failure rate. And so actually the mayor of Santa Cruz, when we took I did this 3 times, and during one of the trips, the mayor actually was out there, and we were riding on a bus, and giving everybody a yay, go forth and conquer, do whatever. So that was kind of cool. So it was a different type of environment, to say the least. So committing to nonviolent protest is it's an action not to be taken lightly, because when you commit to protesting nonviolently, you're allowing the possibility of you to be physically harmed. So it's an emotional thing. It's very difficult to sometimes maintain that objectivity and to maintain that commitment to nonviolence during protest. And of course, Gandhi's the one who first showed us how powerful that can be when an entire group of people refuse to cooperate with whoever's in power. In their case, of course, it was Britain who was in charge of India, and people in India decided they weren't going to let it happen anymore and refused to cooperate. And so he sort of set the groundwork for most nonviolent protests that happened since then. And so anyway, When we got to the Nevada test site, uh, the first time I went as support. Usually, if you're going to protest that kind of a thing in a like a distance sort of stuff, not just walking in the street, then you need to have support staff. You know, the people in your group that know that you're going to go out there and get arrested, and then if you do get arrested, make sure they know where you went and get you back and all this other stuff. And so I was the support person the first time we went out, and I watched other people um, stepping across the line and getting arrested, and then making sure that we knew where they were and got them back and so forth. And so you have to emotionally prepare yourself to see maybe your friends get hurt. Nobody actually did in this particular scenario, the first one, because the local population was actually in agreement. They wanted this to stop, and the low grade radiation and so forth that was in the air. So that was another risk actually that we were taking by going there. But it worked to help my daughter because she saw all these people actually trying to do something and realized that, hey, you can either sit back and take it or you can stand up and try to do something about it. So the second time we went, I got arrested, well, detained, I guess is more accurate, because in both cases when I was detained, they never actually formally charged us, so I'm not sure if it qualifies as an actual arrest. And so the first time I actually did it was very emotionally interesting because I trespassed across the line, and there was this. I wasn't sure what I was going to be expecting, but it was like the ground on this side is the same as the ground on the other side of the fence. It was just sort of a weird kind of feeling. So then that one was just like a short trespass type of thing. We didn't get corralled into, giant cages. That happened the third time. So the first time was more just sort of walking across the line and so forth. And then the third time was okay. They knew we were coming and they were prepared for us, and they built this big outdoor cage, big uh, enough to actually house almost 1,000 people on each side. And I encountered what happens when you do something that the powers that be aren't familiar with or don't expect. So I got to participate in a spiral dance with almost 800 other people, the women on my side of the thing. And when we did that, all law enforcement just kind of stopped. They really didn't know what to do because there's this mass of moving bodies and singing, chanting and singing and stuff going around in these waves of circles and so forth. It was amazing. And then at the end of that, they loaded us onto buses and they bused us 110 miles into another county and then sort of dropped us off. That was one of the larger protests. There were about 5,000 people who were at that one. And when I was on the bus, there was a woman sitting next to me and she started to panic. And you can see how energy shifts when people start to panic. The energy starts to feed into the anxiety that the two officers. We had one officer who was driving, and then two other officers who were like keeping an eye on us, and she was freaking out. So I talked her down. I managed to calm her down. Otherwise, I'm not sure what would have happened on our bus. We were in a tricky situation there where things could have gone wrong. But we were okay, and they let us go as soon as we got there. And the people in camp who were our support team were following buses and taking us back as soon as we got there. I think it was in that town for like 20 minutes, maybe tops, before I was on my way back to the main camp. So, it all seemed, fairly calm-ish as far as it went. And, I'm a person who doesn't break the law because I don't usually find a reason to break the law. It's like I believe in the speed limit, I wear my seatbelt. I haven't had very many encounters with, aggressive law enforcement and that kind of thing. So my daughter, after these 3 events, decided that she wanted to uh, go to a protest and be arrested herself. I guess she wanted to be like her mother. And I had to set some rules, like you can't do this unless you can find another group of people that are underage, so that you're not going to be by yourself, and it has to be local. And she found a local group who were protesting the missile guidance system for one of the first strike weapons that we were making up at the Lockheed factory in the mountains above Santa Cruz. And I had to, of course, keep my word and do that. So I went to their meetings, and they were, getting ready to graduate from high school. So my daughter was significantly younger than the rest of them. But okay, at least it was juveniles and so forth. And I was the support again. So we went up to the um, the event, and we had the younger kids get arrested first because we wanted to get them out of there in case something went bad, which was probably a really good idea considering. And we had all these kids are like across the road, and they start at this end, and my daughter's at this end, and all the other teenagers decided to non-cooperate. Now this is sort of a different animal. You can do nonviolence protests and cooperate with the police when they're trying to arrest you, stand up, walk with them, and so forth. Or you can go completely limp and not cooperate with anything that they're doing and force them to take charge and pick you up and carry you away. And when you do that, the possibility of you being injured increases dramatically, because depending on their frame of mind and how much they feel you are interfering with their ability to have power over you and have authority uh, in their personality, it's just a whole different ballgame. So I was really worried when I saw that, because, and I'm like thinking really hard at my daughter, like, cooperate, cooperate, cooperate. And she did cooperate, although they almost did break her wrist. And she yelled at them and told them to stop because she was cooperating, and they took her out. So this was really my first encounter with what can happen when the power that's in authority feels completely threatened by those who are supposed to be under them. What happened next? So at this point, I'm just a part of this protest, and there is a group of people that are being arrested, and this one woman, she has this wonderful voice. She's just singing fantastic, and she's singing a song about the Enola Gay, which was the name of the airship that dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, during the atom bomb. And the officers that were, she did full non-cooperation, so the officers were like angry and upset with her. So instead of like taking care of her and picking her up and carrying her to the paddy wagon, they decided to punish her for resisting and not cooperating. Actually, she wasn't resisting, she was non-cooperating. And so they pulled her arms up behind her back and tried to dislocate both of her shoulders. And she kept on singing. And this really, really angered them, because they were trying to get her to, they were trying to subdue her, they were trying to crush her spirit so that they would feel like they were in control again, which is that power over, power under dynamic. And it wasn't working, and so they got more and more aggressive, trying to force her into what they wanted. And so they started banging her head against the asphalt road that we were on. And I was standing, the paddy wagon was like here, and we were on either side of the wagon lining the road while they were doing this to this woman in the middle. And there were police officers who were in front of the crowds to keep us from interfering with the arrests. And right in front of me was one of the police officers. And there was a woman standing next to me that I had never met. I did not know who she was. We were just both there, and because, my daughter had already been carted off. And as they were basically torturing this person in front of us, she kept on singing, and you could hear the pain in her voice. It was a very bizarre and incredibly emotional experience. And me and the woman are crying, we're holding on to each other, and she's going, "Why are they doing this?" I said, "I don't know. We're just trying to save lives." And then when they got to the paddy wagon, they basically threw her face first down onto the runnels. They have these like steel floors, and threw her in and hit her head on the other, at the end of the paddy wagon. Um, and the look on the officer's face in front of us was a study in conflict and anguish, that a facial expression I've never seen again, for which I'm grateful. Uh, but I believe that our openness and our genuineness and, you know, being in the moment of what was happening was probably very powerful for him. I don't know what happened to him afterwards, whether he had a hard time sleeping, whether he quit the police force, whether he moved to, go somewhere else, whether he decided to stuff all that and put it someplace. But these are examples of what happens when that authority is challenged in that particular kind of setting. Depending on your setting, you're going to get various responses. I had a weird response with the authorities with my daughter in school. She caused a lot of trouble. I was bad. I raised her to be independent and think for herself, and so apparently she did, and boy, did that cause problems. And we watched this movie, Amazing Grace and Chuck, which is sort of a fantasy type of thing where children are able to stop all wars and our nuclear proliferation and stuff, because all the children in the world stop talking to their parents and their adults, and their grandparents and stuff like that, and force the issue. Very unrealistic. But my daughter was extremely moved by this. So she went to school one day and she wrote everybody a note, and she said that she refused to talk until Bush, the first one, was impeached. And she was just not going to speak again. And so she handed her teacher this note. And the school's response was, I could not believe the school's response to this. It was bizarre to me. I think within the hour of her arriving at school and handing them the note, I got a call from the school counselor, from the school psychologist, or the school nurse, the vice principal, and the principal of the school. And they all called me to tell me that my daughter was like putting her future at risk. This was going to be the end of life as we knew it, because this would like destroy her chances of ever going to a college. She was in the 8th grade, by the way. And that, this whole thing was just a horror story waiting to happen. And they're telling me all this stuff, and I'm thinking, wow, talk about overblowing the situation. She's a teenage girl. How long do you think she can actually not talk? So this is like a threat to them, an extreme threat, and yet what would have happened if she had laryngitis? She didn't refuse to do her schoolwork. She just was going to refuse to talk. And so I told them something they didn't want to hear. I said, I'm behind my daughter's decision 100%. Whatever she decides, I'll back her. And they were just kind of like, what? How can you do this? And so by the end of the day, my daughter was talking, and that was the end of it. But it's like, it's easy to upset this system because it depends upon everyone cooperating with the power structure. And if you're dealing with a person individually and they are running on this model, which is probably most people, the first thing they try to figure out to do, figure out when they meet you, is where do they belong? Are they under you or are they over you? Because the idea of being with you is foreign, and that's the model I want to work with, and that's the model my husband and I have, and that's the model I use with my friends. I'm not over somebody or under somebody. I'm my individual self. They are their individual selves, And, some people have more responsibility than other people, or someone might make more money than someone else, but that doesn't give them intrinsically more power than someone else just because they have that. And that's the societal thing that decides what is power. So, my daughter had another incident at her school that year, actually, when we had a heat wave and she was in PE and she refused to run because it was too hot. And her teacher told her, her gym teacher, whatever, said that fine, if she didn't want to run, she could sit in the sun. And she said, no, I'm going to sit in the shade like a sensible person. And then several members of her class joined her. And I got another call from the school because she was being uncooperative and causing problems. And I just I reamed out the school on that one. I said, you do realize that she has just saved your ass from some hell of a lawsuit if anybody had gotten hurt. We're in a heat wave. We live in a town where if it's 85 degrees, we're all dying, and it was 105. It's like, they shut up. And they didn't call me back. That was the end of it. But those are just some of those, like, you encounter those things on a regular basis, and a lot of times you're not paying attention because it's just so normal for people to interact that way. And unless you're not participating in it, and we had an employee who couldn't figure out where he belonged. He kept trying to either take over our store or not do anything unless somebody did it for him. It was like he was trying to figure out where does he belong. And that's the thing, is like there's a lot of people that cannot adapt to respect and mutual cooperation and equal power. So knowing that when you come into a situation like that, there are ways that you can work around what's going on and know what to expect and realize what's happening, because most people aren't going to actually challenge themselves. They're not going to look at what they're doing, because this is, as far as they're concerned, this is just how it is. This is how society is structured, this is how it works, and this is what it is. So that's that kind of, and our criteria for deciding who has more power is often associated with the kind of position that they have, the amount of money that they make, and artificial, really external things. And a lot of those people are very insecure because they're afraid they don't have any true power of their own. Their power comes from an external source, like from a trapping, from owning this, how many houses or cars or the better car or whatever it happens to be. And if they lose that, then they have nothing. And so it isn't true power. True power comes from knowing who you are and knowing what you can do and taking responsibility for how you act and where you act and all that stuff. It's like that's something that no one can actually take away from you. It's not something that you can lose if you have that kind of power. It doesn't matter where you end up. I mean, bad things might happen to you, but you won't be losing your power because of it. Other people might be trying to see if they can take it away from you, and it'll make some people uncomfortable. But that kind of power is the only kind that actually exists. The power to change yourself or to make your own choices and your own decisions and to be your authentic self. And in magic, that's the kind of power that gets things done. You can have trappings. If you have a lot of money, you can buy the golden statue, the whatever, the fanciest robes. You can pay lots of money for the perfect magic wand. But if your idea of power is that external, that it's like imbued within the things that you have and that you have more power because your things are better than someone else's, you're missing the point. That's not power. The power comes from your personal relationship with the universe and from being who you are, because the universe sees that. So when you're doing a ritual or a spell or even, walking down the street or whatever, think about it. When you're out in your life, think about how people are acting and reacting to each other and see how much fear and anxiety there actually is out there with the idea of not having power. And that doesn't mean you have to not follow the laws. I follow the laws, and it makes life easier, and I believe in the ones that I follow because they make sense to me. But aligning yourself with, um, well, it's the same with religion and those kinds of paths. People have their idea that they have more power because they're right, or they think that they're right. Therefore, they're more true, and so they have more power. It's the same dynamic. So you can apply that concept of the power over and power with, but see the insecurity, because if a person cannot conceive of the possibility of coexisting with another person who feels differently than they do, or has different experiences than they have, or believes in something different than they are, without feeling threatened that somehow that's taking their power away, then they don't have true power. It's just not there. They have the idea of power that they're afraid they're going to lose. And it's just a weird thing. I've really been thinking about it a lot this week because of all the protests and everything else that's going on out there. And I'm hoping that this is a watershed moment in our world, not just in my country, and that we're going to be moving towards more of a power with kind of society, because that's what all these things are. Class structure is the same: power over, power under. I'm in a better class than you are. You have less money than me. I have more money than you. I'm better than you. All that stuff. We need to start to develop these power with relationships. I have power with the spirits that I work with. I don't do confrontational stuff with spirit beings. And I do that on purpose because, again, it's like it's not me being in charge and them having to do what I say. It's like a cooperative effort. Unless it's an emergency in which they're really acting out, in which case, here comes the foot. I'm like, no, they're not going to do that. But it's a way of thinking and a way of being in the world that gives you a different value system, and allows you to see things beyond the things that we've been taught. I mean, we're not, whatever culture we're born into, we get programmed with all of the things that are in that culture from the time that we're born, in our society, in our family, in our religious groups, in our school structures, all that stuff. And as long as we just go along with that, that's what we have. And so, I'm hoping evolution is possible. But at least maybe personal evolution is possible. We may not be able to change every single person out there, but if enough of us accept, acknowledge, and change how we deal with other people, eventually things will coalesce into that. Sort of like the whole concept of the 100th monkey. If enough people have a new way of thinking, the new way of thinking happens. And there's been a lot of that over the last 10 years or so, where people are starting to accept other ways of being. We just have a long way to go. So when you're getting ready to do your spell work, or get together with your deity, or go out in the woods and sit with your nature spirits or what have you, think about the fact that there's other forms of consciousness aren't less than ours. They're just different. So we don't want to bring the same idea of the power over, power under structure into the magical community, into the magical universe that we might have in our own society. And it can sometimes make us feel uncomfortable and uncertain about what we're doing until we actually get that, what true power actually is. So become yourself. That's the biggest thing. Become who you are and be that unique and amazing individual, and that will add to the whole. So anyway, this has been a bit rambling, but I think I got my point across. And everybody be safe out there, and please stay healthy. So this has been Siofra Bradigan and Siofra's Magic Alcove. Blessed be.